Okay, welcome to January 2036, Terra Invicta, and this is Task Force Floodlight. 71 extended range Block 3 Minuteman escorts with one capital ship in the centre providing the flag bridge. This is the Thunderer, which is basically one of the Pelican ships, but we've just added an absolute crap ton of propellant to enable it to brute force its way to Jupiter along with the escorts. Let's talk about this force and our goals for the episode and the way we're going to approach these episodes. As this becomes more space game focused, I want to keep an eye on the strategy of the game and not get too bogged down into the increasingly long and complex battles. So my goal is, from this episode onwards, I'm going to show between 1 and 2 battles per episode maximum. I'll play the smaller ones off screen, but if there's nothing there to learn or to show off or that's strategically significant, I'm not going to show it. I'm going to focus on the battles that demonstrate the way the game is changing, how you use the ships as they change, and how you apply that against the threats the aliens bring to bear. All right, with that set, what's the goal for this episode? We're intending to entrench in Jupiter this episode. 71 escorts should be enough to hold a position against the much weakened fleets in Jupiter, long enough for the platform to get set up. Once the platform's set up, we can reload the missiles as required. What we will need to hold it once the aliens' death stack, though, is reinforcements. So we're going to move up a ship generation this episode. Like I said last time, the goal is to grab the Poseidon Torch, which has a 10.7 exhaust velocity rating and a 20.3 thrust rating at the expense of an obscene degree of fissile use in the propellant, and use that to design some heavy ships that are not as don't have the acceleration, don't have that 4Gs, but do take a large, heavily armed hull and move it from Earth or Mars or wherever we build them to Jupiter in order to really plant our flag and hopefully grind the aliens out so we can secure the resources of this area for long-term experimentation on human habitation in space, which Calisto will be very good for, and fixing our shortages of things like nobles and volatiles, which IO will be very good for at the expense of a massive amount of metal. Beyond that, we're then going to want to step up from the torch generation, which is good enough to move a ship with poor acceleration but with decent DV and get it to Jupiter. We're then going to want to take a step up again technologically and go to antimatter propulsion. That's going to require infrastructure to produce large volumes of antimatter, but that's what will potentially give us the chance to build what we consider sort of our end game fleets, where we can take capital class hulls and give them a combination of lots of DV and lots of acceleration and lots of armor and firepower. No concessions except for obscene cost and tech requirements. And then eventually we might go beyond antimatter, but we'll talk about it at the appropriate point. There's going to be less emphasis, I think, on Earth, but the basic game at this point is we're going to start seeing an explosion in our control point cap as we unlock various technologies. Some of the late game techs give you like plus 120 points, and we'll also be able to steadily set up things like administration buildings in orbit. I'll show these off, which give you even massive boosts of their own to this control point cap. So we'll be able to consolidate more and more areas of the world and basically turn them over to boost production. Because in order to hit our population goals around the solar system, we're going to need to use residence modules, and those have boost upkeeps in order to get as many people into those locations as possible. The other thing Boost is going to be supporting indirectly through those population, also the massive amount of MC we need, is we're going to need more research universities in orbit. These are tier 3 research buildings. They produce about 200 research and cost 2 mission control per unit. They have a population of about 1,000 researchers. So they're very resource intensive, but we can use that to push this research figure even higher. As you can see, we're already at the point where we're getting 14.2k per month. We're getting more from our HABs than we are from our nations, but I think we can push it a little bit higher. So with that introduction, let's get to it. Although before we jump into it, I do need to note that we are temporarily lower on volatiles and water than we should be, in part because some installations didn't have enough agricultural complexes on them. This is one of our research stations around the moon, for example, because I'm trying to push the population of Luna up even higher. We've got a bunch of research universities out here. As I said, 1,000 crew, 200 research output, 2 mission control cost per, and 108 cash cost per. So these are not cheap modules. But we only had enough agriculture complex for 3,000 crew, not the 8,790 we currently have. So throwing on 2 more complexes, that should cut the water and volatile usage by like 170 water, 170 volatiles just for this HAB, which will obviously help. And and then we'll go from there. We will ultimately need more of both, which I'm hoping the Jovian system should be able to deliver. But as a temporary measure to reduce the bleeding, agricultural complexes on all of these research and other installations, absolutely the go. Here's another bit of infrastructure I wanted to introduce, by the way. This is the media center module. These things are starting to go up in low Earth orbit. I'm tacking administration modules on as well. And this is a bit of a grab bag station, but here's what it's got to offer. The admin module gives a 10% increase in output to everything else in the station, so primarily influence in this case, as well as 30 control points and 2 mission control. So it reduces the MC cost of the station by 2. It gives you 30 additional control points on Earth, which is fantastic. It does cost 108 cash and 3 boosts to maintain. So not a cheap module, but a very valuable module. Media centers cost 60 cash to maintain, bring in 10. So net cost 50, 125 crew, so pretty cheap in that respect. But they bring in 25 influence per month. So just this station is now generating 165 influence income. What we can do with that,
I will report when my mission
which only occurs to me a bit late, so I'm doing this later than I probably should have, is we can use that influence to then go direct invest in funding, which only costs influence in order to increase the amount of money our nations are generating. So basically, we can blast propaganda from space at people on Earth to convince them that what they need to do is convince their representatives to spend more, direct more money to the Exodus Fund, or whatever it is that pushes the money into our organization. This is going to be one of the 2 ways we contain the money bleed going forward, because I can't build more money-generating hospitals and whatnot because I'm already in a deep deficit. Although our stockpile will keep us going as we construct more and more boost. Our 2 money-making alternatives are going to be, 1, getting more influence income and channeling it straight into funding. The other approach is we might get to the point of selling resources. There's another tech. You can sell base metals, noble metals, fizzles, antimatter, and exotics to Earth. We will never sell exotics, obviously. But there's another technology that I think increases these prices. So I think we might be able to get the price for fizzles, for example, up to 25 per unit. Even at the moment, selling 1,000 fizzles out of our 22 stockpile, so 3 months' income, would give us 15,000 cash, which would be enough to cover our deficit for several years. And this deficit, even with both these methods, is going to get worse. So researching the tech to increase those sell prices and then selling some resources to help cover the shortfall might be the go. Eventually, once we start producing antimatter, we'll need a lot of it initially to support the fleet build. If eventually we're producing more than we need, we can also sell the antimatter, which is obviously not as profitable as it might first seem because you're converting a shit ton of resources into the antimatter in the first place. So you need to account for the opportunity cost, but might help stabilize this money position. I expect to go several thousand negative until we get the boost up that we can actually start constructing more aged care facilities and more resorts, because we're going to need to spend a lot of boost just supporting A, admin modules, and B, residential modules to push up population counts. That's that. Let's also talk about ship technology, because you may have noticed the torch is no longer down here, which means if we go to the ship design tab, we have options. The Super Jacana is a fantastic example. So what I basically built is a series of Lancers and Dreadnoughts that target 130 plus DV, 130 to 140 DV, using the Poseidon torches, hence the very high fissile cost of building these ships. I've split them into a couple of versions. The Super Jacana is very similar. It's our old Jacana class Lancer, only now it's using a triple tube Poseidon torch, which gives us only 442 millig's of combat acceleration. These things are going to be bricks. They're not particularly maneuverable in combat. So after all the advantages we had in terms of having our escorts be able to exit combat and accelerate to the opponent, we're losing all that. We're keeping our armor, our firepower, we're losing our acceleration, and we're gaining range. So Super Jacana with salvage bay, magazine, heat sink, targeting computer, big siege coiler, and then point defenses. The warning shot, Dreadnought, which is a siege coiler, a bunch of magazines, and 6 tubes of nuclear torpedoes, because I still think bringing missiles is useful. Swatting escorts, bases, creating that surge of firepower to break through PD. I think bringing some missiles is useful, even if we're now mostly dependent on the siege coilers. And thankfully, the warning shot brings its own siege coiler too, so it can help distract the opposing PD with the coiler and then pick the right moment to fire off its missiles. The Disco is a point defense Dreadnought. Now, I haven't tried this yet. I need to switch these over to defensive mode. But this is an experiment with a improved fleet defense, point defense vessel. So what it does is it carries a full rack of 8 phaser point defense, which would normally not be very good at covering ships nearby. But that's because the phaser doesn't do much damage. The targeting range is quite high, 350 kilometers, but it only fires against incoming projectiles if it would do enough damage to destroy them. The laser engine, stacking 5 of them, I think increases the engagement range. It's also got these infrared phaser cannons that don't fire as rapidly, 3-second refire versus 10-second refire, but these things have a defensive targeting range of 267 kilometers and a lot more damage, 4 times as much damage, which means especially against magnetic projectiles, they should engage further out. And unlike point defense phaser turrets, which only get a partial benefit from the advanced laser engine, which is meant to boost a shot by 20 megajoules, the phasers only get a partial benefit. The infrared phaser cannons get the full benefit. So they're getting a full 100, they're getting a 50% firepower boost. So they should hit a lot harder. They're pretty useless against opposing ships. You would need to get into like knife fight range, sub 100 kilometers, for these things to be meaningfully dangerous to anything, even something lightly armored. So they're not anti-ship weapons, they're fleet defense lasers. A concept I want to try, haven't tried it on the current patch. And then we have the Pathfinder Block 2, which is the ultraviolet arc laser cannon lancer with 4 advanced laser engines, targeting computer, lithium heatsink, and a 2-tube Poseidon torch, again providing roughly the same performance characteristics. So what we're putting together, or what I'm going to put together, is a fleet that can follow up from Task Force Floodlight, made up of those heavier vessels, gun it out to Jupiter, and entrench to make sure the aliens aren't able to throw us out of our base, which hopefully we are going to secure in just a couple of months when Floodlight arrives on the 27th of April, 2036. Humanity first steals ECM, that's fine.
Upon a dying world, sucking it dry long past the point when it can still sustain us, and yet an entire galaxy of possibility beckons. Why are we so short-sighted? When will we see that there is nothing left for us here? Director Khalid Al-Ashqar, social media post.
Hashtag Project Exodus. This post, the flavor text, I think, does a good job in this game of defining the leaders. It kind of feels vaguely Alpha Centauri-esque in that it tells you who the leaders are through short quotes, and somehow does a really good job. This makes me feel really a bit shit about Khalid Al-Ashqar and Project Exodus, because describing Earth as a dying world, sucking it dry long past the point it can sustain us, entire gout, why are we so short-sighted? When will we see that there is nothing left for us here? That's the part of the phrase that I do have a problem with. Because Exodus is only ever talking about taking a small number of people to another colony. The idea of broadening humanity's horizons, fine. Being a backup plan in case the aliens succeed, fine. I can get behind that idea. Saying there's nothing left and you're happy to leave 8+ billion people behind, not so great on that one. Anyway, antimatter mass production. Frustrating paradox. Antimatter-based reactors could solve our every power need both on Earth and in space, but the creation of sufficient antiparticles in the first place requires vast amounts of energy, not to mention vast and costly machines. So basically they observed that the antimatter process, because you can't just harvest it from nature, you can pump oil or you can dig up uranium and then you can turn it into energy, and that's an energy positive process because the potential energy already exists. You can farm antimatter in-game and in real life, but in absolutely mind-bogglingly minute quantities. So antimatter is really, in this game, and a lot of conceptions, an energy storage mechanism more than it is an energy generation mechanism, because you need to make the antimatter first, and that's what this technology is all about. Atom smashers, antimatter propulsion, plasma core reactors. But in order to produce antimatter, what we're going to need to do is go to Mercury, where there's a shit ton of solar energy, use that solar energy to create antimatter, which basically serves as our glorified battery for that immense amount of solar energy, and then use that to power our warships. So there we are. Open research. And we can go straight, I believe, into probably antimatter propulsion, which also unlocks a tech path to the interstellar launch facility, which I believe is our objective. So we'll want to grab that. And then the next question is, how do you produce antimatter? Well, by going antimatter mass production, we've actually only unlocked the level 2. Let me do full tree. This unlocks the atom smasher, which produces a tiny amount of antimatter, 0.009 antimatter per month. Oof. However, the atom smasher for 30,000 tech potentially unlocks the super collider, the tier 3 version that eats 120 cash, 750 power, 20 metals, 20 noble metals, and 10 fissile materials. It's an expensive module, but it produces 0.1 antimatter per month. So if we can produce 20 of these modules, horrifically expensive, I know, we could eventually get an antimatter production of 2 per month, which would be massive. But the Super Collider requires Accelerando, which is why we're researching at the same time. Accelerando is basically the screw it, we do mega projects technology. It's basically a social acceptance that everything is changing, we need to think big, there's no more incrementalism anymore. So it leads to things like global empire, which is like plus 120 control points. Induced inflection points, which is like maximum effort, so you can spend like 500 influence on a single action. It's the no half measures tech, and it unlocks super colliders, later versions of the inertial confinement fusion reactor, which is probably the best fusion reactor, the most overpowered reactor in the game, also the most research expensive. It's a gateway technology, which is basically 150,000 research of thinking big, like really big. And we'll be getting that in February 2037. That plus the mass production tech we just got means we can finally get our super colliders getting set up around Mercury. That'll probably take a full another year to get started after we get both of those technologies. And then after we get that infrastructure set up, it might take a good 6 months before we get the antimatter to even start producing our next generation of ships. So you can see why I was keen to plan ahead, why I was keen to start producing those nuclear torch ships first, because it's going to be a while before antimatter arrives. But I think by the end of the decade, before 2040, we should have our first antimatter-powered vessels entering service. And here we are. It's April 2036, and Task Force Floodlight has arrived in the Jovian system. We're around Io. You can see the Thunderer in the center, the fleet flagship, keeping the mission control cost of all these other vessels down. And critically, what we can do is found our fission platform. I'll rename it in a moment. What we'll immediately do is probably take it up to Tier 2. We could just spend 90 days to go straight to Tier 3, but I'm in such a rush to get some higher-level shipyards up that we'll probably go immediate orbital core. And this is fission power construction module. That's not what I want. We'll throw heavy fission, space dock. So in 60 days... 60 days for the upgrade and 60 days for these. It'll take longer to get the construction module. That'll be October. That we'll get the space dock, and that'll allow us to refuel at least our Delta V, reload our missiles if we have to fight off the aliens in the meantime, and also potentially build a small colony ship. My plan is to build a small colony ship with a outpost module, and we can use that to colonize even before the construction module finishes. And also potentially use it for other planets in the Jovian system. What I'm going to do is basically hug the station until we can reload Task Force Floodlight, and then, unless the aliens send reinforcements, we might be able to bash down some of the alien fleets and stations in this system, because 70 escorts will overwhelm any station defense. We could run at it, fire nukes at maximum range, never get in range of most of its defenses, blow it up, go back home, reload, come and blow up the ground bases. This should be enough, at least until the aliens send fleet reinforcements, because right now, after the damage we did with our previous fleet, there's nothing in the Jovian subsystem that can deal with this force. The key will just be to get reinforcements here before the aliens send something strong enough to deal with it, because they'll want to. So I'm going to get set up, and then, if we get the infrastructure established, we'll start cleaning up this subsystem. All right, we have some proof that the AI works differently than it did previous times that I played this game. In the past, what happened is if you sent anything to the Jovian system, the aliens responded immediately and with an almost psychotic level of focus, and would send lots and lots of small fleets from everywhere to scramble as many assets into the Jovian system as they could as quickly as possible. That hasn't happened here. We've upgraded our station for Task Force Floodlight. Its shipyard is now operational, and so Operation IO Liberation Station, so Oil Station, is now ready to go. We're building some layered defense arrays. We're building some shipyards, some level 2 shipyards to support a force and get some more vessels out. We're building a colony vessel. All is good, so Task Force Floodlight can now sortie out into the system. Before we arrived, the aliens were sending reinforcements to Jupiter, 3 separate fleets. The biggest one of those was this one here, Jupiter Response. It arrived in the Jovian system, refueled, and then apparently decided, nope, I'm not going to fight Task Force Floodlight with my 34 vessels, and it's buggered off, and it's going to attack us in Mars instead, apparently going to attack us where it thinks we're weak. The problem, of course, is I think Task Force Mars with its 29 ships can actually handle them. We'll reinforce that with a few more militia ships, which is what they're good for, being built in an emergency before an enemy force can arrive. We'll intercept and we'll destroy this one probably off screen, because if I add 20 militia ships to this, I'll outnumber them, I'll get to field more vessels than they do, and my Lancers are really, really capable, especially augmented with all of those missiles. So we should be able to smack that fleet. There are 2 other forces incoming to Jupiter. Victor 794, Victor 814. I think the goal should be to intercept them. I think we should go and try and destroy many of the stations that are in the Jovian system at the moment before they arrive, intercept them on arrival with our Floodlight force, get ourselves 18 free alien ship kills, hopefully, while also cleaning up the infrastructure around the Jovian system. So we can resupply now. It'll take 5.2 days now that we have a shipyard. Cost us 218 fissiles, 2.7k metals, 1.3 noble metals, 900. You can see we burnt a lot of nuclear bombs. Like we fired off thousands of nukes to get to Jupiter with all of these nuclear-powered ships, and this is the cost of replacing all of those nukes. So we'll lock in that resupply. But once we're done, this force will become available to go station smacking and also hopefully intercept some of those forces as they arrive. We'll start by just doing a quick station bash around Europa, because the more shipyards we can take out, the better. Plus, it's a chance to farm some easy promotions and get a few ship kills. We get Task Force Floodlight to destroy the HAB. We don't have Marines, so destruction it is. There we go. Measly 0.25 exotics, but their infrastructure is gone. Now, I also decide we can attempt some bombardment here because we have so many nukes that what I'm hoping is the first salvo will be enough to destroy the base without the base having a chance to shoot back with its lasers, which would easily swat our escorts. If that theory is true, what will happen is that. Because if you have enough siege coils or enough nukes, you don't need the Marines. Although the Marines would obviously be better there because then we would have gotten the exotics for our trouble. Anyway, we'll ship those guys back to Oil Station. While we're in cleanup mode in the Jovian system, we're also in build mode. So we don't have our construction outpost yet. But what I have built is this little outpost ship. All it is a little gunship with a single fission output kit. Very, very, very cheap. And what it can do is you can pick a site, found an outpost. So maybe we'll go this one here with 20 noble metals. Like we're going to settle a lot of these because these are all some very good sites. They're going to be expensive because of the 4-time radiation multiplier, so it's expensive to build locations. We can found an outpost, then transfer to IO Liberation Station, which takes 0 time. It repairs in less than a day, which regenerates the module, and then it can go layer a new outpost. So this is going to be how we set up bases despite not having a construction module. Having a ship bay and a colony ship does the job. This outpost mining complex, by the way, just basic tier 1, which we'll eventually upgrade. I'm not sure whether we'll take the full pain of upgrading to a colony mine immediately because it's going to be very, very expensive. Just a tier 1 mining module here is going to generate 71 nobles, 370 metal, and 137 volatiles. So nothing to sneeze at in terms of yields. The yields in the rest of the Jovian system aren't particularly aggressive. Like Europa's got a fair amount of water, but the metal yields aren't all that. Ganymede, like, there's some yields here. You can see them, but again, we're still looking at a 2.1 radiation modifier. Calisto is going to be the cheapest to settle, but there's only a couple of sites which I'd regard as standouts, right? Like Brand Crater here has nobles, a decent nobles, a little bit of fissiles, but of course there's already an alien base here. And with their insane, I'm seeing how important the Jovian system is to the alien economy, because this one site for them is generating 166 nobles, 333 metals, 1,000 water, 320 volatiles. If we go alien bases, right? They have a base in the middle asteroid belt, which is very important to them, which is just generating 2,500 water volatile combined. Bettina, 250 Bettina, is clearly a noble site. 540 nobles, 1,100 metals, very important. The Jupiter subsystem, as you can see, has a bunch of good sites, but it does remind me that it's going to be good to knock these out, because there's especially water and volatiles, big incomes. Not as many nobles or fissiles, although there's one 50 fissile income site, which will be really good to purge. But eventually, if we want to take the pressure off and we're willing to be a bit aggressive, cleaning up this base, 250 Bettina, that will hurt. Taking 540 nobles and 1,100 metal off them, that'll hurt. So I think we commit to cleaning up the rest of Jupiter with our Task Force IO, and which I think is this split. Yeah, Task Force IO is doing small intercepts while the main Floodlight Force is doing bigger intercepts. Clean up Jupiter and then go from there and decide which of these sites we want to settle. I'm also researching Mission to the Outer Planets. It's about to be done, so let's just cycle that.
Only when we can look our enemy in the eye can we understand why he is not so different from ourselves. Then, only then, can we hope for peace, I fetching. Commissioner Kiran Banerjee, Private Correspondence.
So we'll launch those probes straight away. So this unlocks missions to the outer planets, which is like the Kuiper Belt and whatnot. We can mostly want it because it increases our mine allowance by 6. So that'll allow us to set up new mines, which we're doing in the Jovian system now, without having to shut down our previous ones. Still much to learn about the farthest and coldest reaches of our solar system, but if we can reach them, both Uranus and Neptune offer hope for colonization, or at least their moons do. So it talks about Miranda, Titania, Oberon. The interesting one of all of these, if you got to Saturn early, would be Titan, because there the atmosphere is so thick that if you lay a base on Titan, it's very hard to destroy in terms of orbital bombardment because the atmosphere is so thick. We're going to start researching Titanic spacecraft because we need it for our interstellar launch facility, and because once we have antimatter engines, pairing them with Titans is just cool. So super capitals, antimatter engines, bring it on eventually. Accelerando is almost done, 20 December 2036. But I got some alien bases to blap. I also still have a few more of these small alien forces that are hanging around in the Jovian system, often defending stations to pick off, which we do, because we do have the pursuit acceleration to catch them where needed. I'm willing to bet, however, that the aliens will still send a relief force to Jupiter. It's just too valuable to them. So here it is, newly launched from our shipyards around Earth. I'll just call it relief force for now. 21 vessels, mixture of dreadnoughts and lancers, and one support cruiser, the Banner, which holds a flag bridge. Our transit time to Io, 14 weeks at max burn. We can take it to 16 and save a little bit, but this will cost a lot of fissiles to get there. I really don't care. So we'll have reinforcements. I'll play around with this a little bit. We should have reinforcements, big chunk of capital ships that I think is worth way more than 4.2 combat power, to be honest. I think this will work a lot better than the numbers suggest. They should be arriving early 2037. Okay, I've renamed it Task Force Illumination. It should be arriving in the Jovian system on the 3rd of May. I decided to save a little more DV because of the resource costs involved. I'm also sending out a whole bunch of marine cruisers that I produced at Mars. These ships are relatively basic. Full stack of elite marines, basic Poseidon torch engine to get them out to Jupiter faster. These will allow us to drop marines on bases rather than bombarding them, which should allow us to recover some exotics. Every point of exotic matters, so rather than nuking the bases from orbit, we're going to send in the marines and recover what salvage we can. The exotics count has gone up because Task Force Mars was able to blap pretty badly that alien force that came through. And the reason I'm not showing that is because I now know what the big battle for this episode is likely to be. The reinforcements of Task Force Illumination will get to the Jovian system on the 3rd of May. On the 3rd of June, an alien force will arrive. This I've called Jovian Threat Wave 2. The aliens have put together a Doom fleet to take back the Jovian system. It is 61 vessels, the largest stack we've ever seen, on nominally 11.2 combat power. A huge number of vessels, laser boats, torpedo boats, laser frigates, magnetic frigates, Diamond Fury battleships. The battleship, by the way, has quadruple iridescent star torpedo bay. So, yeah. These things hurt, by the way. 11.6 G's acceleration, 14.2 DV. Those are some chunky torpedoes. So we're going to have a showdown, I think, between Illumination and maybe some smaller ships and the alien vessels of Jovian Threat Wave 3. I'm going to try and pinch off Victor 794 when it arrives, because there's a Titan and a Dreadnought and a battleship. Like, this is a big, powerful force, but it's small. So it's big in terms of displacement, not big in terms of ship size. So we should be able to swamp this with our escorts before it arrives. But this, we're going to fire our capital ships at. It's the big showdown this episode, which will probably decide, at least for the short to medium term, who controls the Jovian system. Because if I destroy this, I'll have time to really dig in, battle station up, get shipyards up, etc. Whereas if we lose, we're probably going to lose all of our infrastructure. So showdown, Jovian system, probably 3rd June, 2037.
Miserable poison.
Woohoo, Titanic
I
spacecraft.
want to die countless light years from Earth with a smile on my face as I bask next to a perfect ocean under a perfect sky. Director Khalid Al-Ashgar, preparing for tomorrow online newsletter.
Again, I'm not sure with Al-Ashgar here why he expects that wherever he goes we'll have a perfect ocean under a perfect sky. And I don't appreciate the contempt of Earth. I don't appreciate the contempt for the masses. I don't appreciate the contempt for our planet. It's a valuable commodity. Those lives are valuable. So the idealism of sending a colony elsewhere, I can appreciate. This attitude towards Earth, nah. Like, miserable poison world, mate, only if we stuff it up. In fact, if anything, I'm cleaning up the environment on Earth at the moment. If you go to the environmental scores, like, China is improving. It's at 1.29 and I'm increasing it quickly. The European Union's at for the moment, a perfect 5.479. So is the United States. So I have massively reduced greenhouse emissions just because I can in the EU and United States and North America. Now I'm doing the same in China, which is a big emitter. So I can if I can get that 3 billion down to like 500 million, that'll make a lot of difference. So with all due respect, mate, shut up. Anyway, Titanic spacecraft, awesome. I've also got Task Force IO, 62 escorts with some salvage bay support. These Marauders are there to carry salvage bays so we get more exotics. They're going to intercept that small alien fleet that's on its way, Victor 794. They should get it on the 7th of April. We'll smack that so that when the bigger force arrives, it doesn't benefit from those extra ships, especially since even though it's only 11 vessels, I don't like alien Titans and Dreadnoughts, and I don't like them having fleet support. So we'll smack them while they're isolated and then deal with the large force when it arrives, hopefully. But this is TFIO. We've also got... Oh, this is Task Force Europa. This is a smaller force that I've got guarding a station I've set up around Europa because the aliens from their stations that I haven't destroyed yet keep launching small raids. So I'm swatting them with this. The exotics recovery crew will be arriving on 14 April, which will be our signal to go and destroy those remaining stations and installations because then we can salvage them with the Marines for exotics. Illumination due in May. Earth, Mercury, Mars, all repaired and fully operational. And we have a next-generation orbital defense gun around Earth, Force Overwatch, with the new Overwatch-class Lancer, which is our giant orbital space gun, because you always need a giant orbital space gun. 960-centimeter green arc laser cannon, but this time with a Firestar fission lantern engine, so it's at least vaguely mobile. So Task Force Overwatch can drop rounds or beams on any force we need to engage, but for the moment it's just cleaned up all of the xenoflora again. Earth is currently xenoflora free, and Overwatch in orbit makes sure that that happens. And that no one invades countries I like, because having your armies melted with a 9.6 meter aperture laser from orbit is a somewhat demoralizing event. And here we go. A battle to determine the fate of Jupiter. Now, what I've realized as we come in is that our Admiral has decided to bring in a bunch of our escort missile boats, not our siege coil lancers, so I don't have the big firepower on the field that I would ideally like. This presents a little bit of a problem, because if we advance too far without them, the fleet's going to break up, and I'm going to have my laser ships and siege ships separately. So what I decided to do early on against this alien force is push the missile boats forward and then run an escape maneuver off to the left-hand side of the screen. So the missile boats will dump their missiles, they'll either take casualties or they'll disengage, because they're the ones with all the acceleration. Our large ships are bricks by comparison. And then by disengaging, our ship count in battle will come down, which will mean we're able to call in the Lancers at a point where we're not that far from our spawn zone, and our fleet will mostly be coherent, or at least that's the theory. I start allocating missiles at this point, and the idea is I want these ships out of here as soon as possible, which means they need to fire as soon as possible and then get out of there, preferably surviving, but, you know, the life of a militia ship is what it is, and we are talking about exposing side armor, but I don't see any way around that problem. So I allocate the missiles mostly to the ships in the front segment of the formation, noting the aliens have put some of their heavy hitters up back. Honestly, the priority target for me in terms of the stuff I most want to hit, it's actually all these flankers and escorts that are peeling off. Because while I do have some lasers available, which will be able to hit side armor, I'm always a little bit less nervous once they get taken away. So I'm going to finish allocating torpedoes and let them fly. Basically, as soon as I unpause, the alien lasers are deeply interested in our escort, so I decide on an even more aggressive breakaway maneuver. It won't save every ship, but it should save a decent number, and that's more survivable than they'd be if they stayed in the main battle line and waited until the merge, which we very much don't want. So you can see that screen of escort ships doing what escort ship do, screening the main force of capitals and dying in the process, but hopefully doing some serious numbers. I really think of this as like a classic World War II naval torpedo screening maneuver, where the destroyers have gone forward, they've laid a spread of torpedoes, and that's going to affect the enemy's ability to maneuver while the capital ships get their act together. What you can see here is that a maneuvering capability of our big ships is very limited. But what I realize is because of the way the Admiral spawned our ships, with all the escorts being in the center essentially, is we're going to have big gaps in our PD coverage. So what I decide to do, even though it means there might be risks of things like collisions later on, is give a short burn order to our various lancers on the flanks to close up. What you can see here is the impacts against all those escort ships, which is fantastic. We're losing a lot of our escorts, but they're losing a lot of their escorts too. Those flankers are never going to make contact. And the ones that do, with only a few survivors, our laser ships should be able to handle it. And if you just heard that notification, because we lost escorts and have others disengaging, we're able to bring in our lancers, so we're going to have our formation joining up relatively soon. I'm going to have to give manual priority targeting orders to the Pelicans, which are the ones with the ultraviolet arc lasers, to try and swat the last of these escorts, basically going after whatever's showing side armor at any given time. But yes, in terms of overall formation, my idea at this point was to bring the formation of capital ships as tight together, and then we're going to take one or two of the disco ships and we're going to try and push those forward, hoping that the alien targeting will say, hey, that's a closer target, I should engage that, rather than the stuff behind it, ignoring the fact that the thing in front is the one with all of the forward-facing point defense. That's the theory, at least. We'll also accelerate the Super Chicanas to catch up, but as you can see, these bricks don't have the acceleration we're used to using. They do still have the firepower, though. So those Pelicans are doing decent work against those escorts on the flank. I am aware of those escorts that are coming in over the top of us, though. They're going to be the next target, but really I want this group off to the side neutralized first. Because then what we can do is we can padlock up, face the flankers that are trying to come over the top of us and destroy them that way. Flanking doesn't work if they're only on one flank. And at the moment, the main alien force is a little bit far enough back that I'm not overly worried. Autumn Dawn, what a name. You don't deserve that name, mate. I guess he's not the Pillar of Autumn, he's just the Autumn Dawn, but still. Now, you'll see me release a couple of extra missiles and siege coils and basically everything I can do in order to ward off my next concern, which is these flankers up top. I'm not so much worried about this capital ship phalanx that's coming towards me. That's a future Perun problem. Right now, it's just making sure that these flankers that are trying to burn to establish flanking positions don't survive that maneuver. You can see a lot of IR lasers are hitting the targets. They're going to do jack shit, absolutely nothing, it's the UVs coming off the Pelicans that is going to do the job. And they are doing the job as long as I priority target them where I need them to be at any given time. So, for example, this guy's burning the waning light, burning, showing side armor in the process. So even though he's at long range, the fact we're punching through some relatively flimsy side armor means that even lasers that are nowhere near as destructive hit per hit as, say, coil guns are still going to have an impact. Meanwhile, when a guy doesn't show you his side armor, if they get close enough, good enough, because you ignore more and more armor as you do. You can see the last of the escorts have almost finished disengaging off to the left-hand side of the screen, and the number of flankers has been basically exhausted. So we're about to have a straight capital on capital fight. Their reinforcements are coming in. They'll try and merge them up with their main force. So it's basically just going to be gun line versus gun line. And with ships that are not particularly mobile like these ones, that's the way I'm happy to have it. I'm holding some missiles in reserve. The idea is the siege coils will do a constant rate of attrition, and if it ever looks like we're going to be overwhelmed at any given point, that's when we release the missiles to provide a little bit of a firepower surge, eliminate some critical targets, and get ourselves out of trouble. You can see the fleet has almost finished merging. There will be some evasive maneuvers to prevent collisions taking place, but the main ships that are going to be pushed forward are going to be the discos and maybe some of the marine cruisers, because even though they're marine cruisers, they're actually stuffed to the gills with point defense. They have basically no offensive weapons, but they have a lot of point defense. So they're good to screen up front. And then the ships that we're going to want to send around the side at one point are going to be, if we can get away with it, would be the Pelicans. Get our own laser lancers around behind the side of the formation and see if we can poke some holes in these capital ships. Okay, what we have at the moment is a bit of a long-range slap flight as I try and bring my fleet together. You can see those IR lasers doing a good job intercepting torpedoes and missile rounds, and the siege coils going out. I'm trying to target them after 1 or 2 vessels at a time, just to try and overwhelm their PD and do the best I can with what I've got. I'm also pushing the 1 or 2 discos forward, and when one ship overextends, a warning shot ship, I decide to lower their relative velocity and then reface them. So it is the discos leading the charge the way they intended. I just got a little bit confused between my various ships, which can happen when you're fielding new vessels for the first time. So I'm cleaning up the formation now and pushing a disco forward as the fleets get closer and closer together. As you can see, though, the aliens are quite smartly bringing their reinforcements up to try and merge them with the ones that are surviving from the initial phase. So we're going to be dealing with a fleet wall versus fleet wall formation. I'm just going to try and get a couple of flankers out and see if that works. As you can see, though, siege coils draw a lot of attention. So there's a lot of lasers in this fleet that are being eaten up, even on coil shots that are near misses. So I'm spending a lot of siege coil ammo, but I'm also limiting the offensive power of the fleet. And I'm happy for that, because I'm exposing a little bit of side armor here and there as I maneuver. And I'm also getting a sense of which ships carry all the lasers. So, for example, you've probably identified that small laser battery boat in the center of the alien formation. That stands out because of the sheer number of intercepts it's doing. Also, occasionally we do manage to pick off some larger vessels, but my main focus, once again, is on these bloody escort-size things that keep trying to get around the sides. Luckily, the lasers are here, they do their job, and I pick this as a moment to get some missiles out, while also trying to organize, as you can see, what will become one of the Pelican Lancers that will be flanking one side, and I'll try and set up a similar flanking force on the other side as well. The star of the show at this point, though, is the missile salvo. It's a lot of what I have left, and I'll admit this was pretty much a vibe salvo. I just had the sense from the amount of coils that I was putting out that their PD would probably let something through, and I might get 1 or 2 of the larger vessels. And if I could even knock out some PD on some of those front-facing battleships and whatnot, then the coils would be just that much more effective. And lo and behold, we get a kill on a battleship there. Shape charges destroy the one in the top as well. Rake through the flank of that one, and we get multiple capital class kills, which pushes the engagement distance out again. Does give a little more hope to the Antigone, which is overextended from the formation. It got a little bit excited when it was launching missiles and did some evasive maneuvers to avoid a collision, so that was bad piloting on my part. There was a couple of ships I've intended to push forward, namely the point defense equipped ones. The Antigone, that was a misplay on my part. I didn't realize it was going to go evasive to avoid a collision. It did, however, mean that it was closer and faster when it released its missiles, so we'll never know how many of these hits are due to that particular act of mispositioning. More impacts, more hits, and once again, the missiles coming in clutch. We don't have many missile ships. We saw the escorts do their job at the start, and then we saw these are the missile dreadnoughts firing off at the end. And what they've done is they've just broken up that formation enough that the mutually supporting PD is gone, and I think between the lasers and the coils at this point, we're going to be able to clean up without much concern, because a lot of firepower was in those large capital ships, even though there's a lot of small stuff here at the back still. A lot of the big guns, the stuff that really threatened us, is gone, and it's now mostly, hopefully, despite the size of the enemy force, going to be cleanup. Now, admittedly, in a bit of a testament to alien engineering, some of their ships do manage to get fairly close. And there are casualties on my side because they're able to get close and start really pushing stuff into our defenses. Don't underestimate alien capital ships. Just because nukes swat them really easily, and I'm firing pretty much my last missile reserves at this point, doesn't mean that they're easy to knock out with everything else. That said, seeing that I'm taking casualties again, that PD's being overwhelmed, I do release my last reserves of missiles. And once again, I'm very happy with how missiles are bailing me out of a difficult situation. They provide additional firepower in bursts when you need it. And so while I might have achieved great results by just having more coil guns or more lasers, I'm reasonably happy with downgrading to some smaller siege coils on the Dreadnoughts. You get a 3-slot instead of a 4-slot if you had brought a Lancer, and getting the missiles instead. Also, you can see the Disco ship engaging with all of its point defense. That's what I mean by pushing the PD ship forward. It is swatting a heroic amount of missiles and magnetics out of the way of the front of the fleet that would otherwise be causing problems. So I'm not sure it'll be able to keep up with everything, but it is catching more threats than any ship has any right to do. Not an easy job to do, probably the worst in the fleet after escort duty, but important work. Meanwhile, the flanks are pretty much in place at this point, which means those UVs that we have on the flanks are now punching through side armor, and they're doing work. Even at those long distances, they are doing their job. Now, the big issue here is that PD ship lost its engines. So it has floated to basically point-blank range with the alien fleet, and yet it is still going. It's probably doomed at this point, because it's lost some of its point defense weapons, it's taking fire from all angles, it's taking all of the fire from the enemy fleet, and I can't get it out of there. So I've just padlocked it because it can't maneuver, but I am really happy with the performance of that Disco, because it has sucked up an inordinate amount of firepower, to the point where, as you can see, it is literally a point-blank range engagement between it and some of these alien vessels, and it is only at that point that they are finally able to bring the thing down. Not a loss I'm happy about, and one that could potentially have been avoided, but it's distracted the alien fleet while the rest of my coilers get closer and closer to force their rounds through the alien point defense, and get this fight to a point where I think it's increasingly looking like it's over. Siege rounds at these kind of distances just aren't realistic for the aliens to stop. We have violet, ultraviolet rays coming in from the flanks, and with each ship that's hit, there's less PD to intercept the next slug. So while I do have to be a little bit careful about orientation in the final moments to make sure no one gets a laser shot into the one side armor of some of these Lancers as I punch some rounds into the final targets, I think at this stage we're pretty much done. We do end up floating to the merge, but what that means is the padlocked alien ships end up turning their side armor to the remaining UV lasers, which immediately punch through, and it means that a lot of the time the aliens are facing in the correct direction to fire, but most of their weapons have already been knocked out. Meanwhile, I've priority targeted most of my remaining siege coilers on these big remaining ships to try and knock them out, including the undamaged, for the moment, Divine Concord, which is already taking siege coil hits and will go down in no time. Flankers are having an absolute field day punching through that vulnerable side armor. And while I would normally abhor going to the merge, so many of the alien weapons have been knocked out at this point, and what's left is so focused on trying to intercept the big chunks of metal that it's a relatively safe place for our Lancers that would normally be incredibly vulnerable to be. The last remaining alien ships on the field include 2 Divine Concord class Lancers, including the first vessel of the class. But as you can see, I saved just a few last missiles to deliver the coup de grace, and this is the point where I choose to fire them. With the destruction of the Graceful Demon, we're done. Total proceeds, 25.2 exotics, a whole bunch of promotions, and on our side, 3 capital ship losses. That's probably not ideal, but trading 3 Lancers for that entire alien fleet, plus the escort casualties, of course, I'm definitely going to call that a win. Certainly less Pyrrhic than some of our previous wins, because it means that the rest of the fleet is still very much capable of fighting, repairing, and engaging further alien groupings. Total losses, 15 Exodus ships, 56 alien vessels. And we'll be able to clean up the remainder because there were some aliens left standing afterwards. We'll be able to jump on those after we equalise DV, get some ships back to the station, to grab a few more exotics and a few more easy kills to run that ratio up even more. And here we go. Additional 1.5 exotics, I think that is. 5 additional alien casualties, no human ships lost. Call that a win. Not a big win, but a win regardless. Although, believe it or not, just after this, as our fleet stands victorious in the background, the Resistance actually decided not to get left out and decided to claim a very small victory of their own. But I think with that victory, and it now being pretty clear that we're going to hold the Jovian system for the time being, that's what we're going to call the episode. The goal for next episode then is probably to pull together some better resource gathering tools. I'm talking our first antimatter powered warships, most likely Titans, that are capable of manoeuvring all around the solar system to go where the aliens are to collect the exotic materials that their ships and stations are made of.